Hello, people. Finished the book, Between Two Fires, Europe's Path in the 1930s. This was a really good book. Took me a little while to read it. Not all the chapters were great. The chapter on France was a little bit boring, but that's what this author did, David Clay Large. That's what he did. He went from like France to Germany to Austria to Italy, and then the last chapter was the Munich conference. So I'm assuming that that was Europe instead of an individual country. He just went to all the different countries, all the major countries, and picked an episode from the 30s and kind of fitted into how it led up to another world war. And that's, of course, that's what the title is referring to, Between Two Fires, World War I and World War II. I got a lot of notes here. It's 381 pages. This was published in 1990. For France, this author picked this thing called the Stavisky Affair. And Stavisky was just a con man that worked his way through just about everything. Ended up with contacts in government, and by the time they brought this guy down, it implicated all these other people. Kind of an oddball thing at the end. There was a guy that was killed by a train. He was tied to the railroad tracks. And even the people that seemed interested in the truth of what happened to this guy, they had they could only conclude that this guy took some kind of poison or some kind of sedative, and but before he did that, he tied himself to the railroad tracks. That's what everybody came. That's the conclusion that they all came to. My notes for the Stavisky affair: boring, typical French stuff. Downfall of a government, barricades. The next one, Austria, the Austrian Civil War. It was socialist versus the conservative Christians. This was really interesting. It shows you what would happen had maybe like the Oath Keeper types, had they control of the government, had they control of the military, things may have worked out a little bit differently on January 6th. In Austria, the Christian nationalists were in control of the government and the military, and the socialists and the communists had their own armed militia. The government ends up they took artillery into Vienna, and they pounded down these houses where the socialists were. It was pretty brutal. I never even knew that there was such a thing as a civil war in Austria. Total of about 500 people killed, so it wasn't what we think of a civil war in the United States. I learned a cool word there. Dorftrottel means village morons. There was a thing called the Schattendorf verdict, and it reminded me a hell of a lot of the Rittenhouse thing. The Christian conservatives won this civil war, but what happens after that? Typically, it happened in Italy, it happened in Germany, it happened in Austria. Dollfuss was the guy's name. He was the prime minister. He was dead within 5 months. And, within a year or two, they had the Anschluss. So it wasn't good. They went to Germany with the Night of the Long Knives. I will never read a better account of the Night of the Long Knives than I did in the book Der Führer. And I have to do some reading here. Page 122. I don't have the light on in here, so it's hard for me to even see the page numbers. Where are we at here? Second to last paragraph. Hitler had already decided to act, but he had probably not yet decided exactly how he would proceed, or what the full scope of his operation would be. In this regard, his lieutenants Himmler, Heydrich, and Goering were more precise in their calculations. They were busy drawing up lots of undesirable persons, which they circulated among their friends for additional suggestions. These were invariably forthcoming, for everyone seemed to know a few subversives, or at least someone who was thinking of becoming one. Soon the Reich list took on the dimensions of a letter to Santa written by an especially greedy child. A witness to this process recalled that the entire party leadership seemed to be intoxicated with the smell of blood. Bottom of 123, 124. The Reichswehr considers itself in close harmony with the Reich of Adolf Hitler. The time has passed when people from various camps could pose as spokesmen for the Reichswehr. The role of the army is clearly determined. It must serve the National Socialist state, which it recognizes. The hearts of the Reich and the army beat in unison. The Reichswehr wears with pride the symbols of Germany. It stands disciplined and faithful behind the leaders of the state, behind the Marshal of the Great War, President von Hindenburg, its supreme leader, and behind the Führer of the Reich, Adolf Hitler, who, coming from the ranks of the army, is and always will be one of us. I wish I would have noted who wrote that. Oh, this is General von Blomberg. And my note there says, this statement will never be made here in regards to Trump or any other United States president. Approximately 85 victims total in the Night of Long Nights. Then we moved to Italy with the Ethiopian thing, where Italy, they invade Ethiopia. They have a couple of setbacks in the beginning of this war, but they crush the Ethiopians, mostly because they indiscriminate bombing, they use poison gas. The League of Nations famously does nothing. Mussolini, page 141. I'm supposed to find this. Roughly 10 years earlier, Ernest Hemingway had come away from a first encounter with Mussolini equally unimpressed. He had noticed that the Deuce, trying to appear the voracious reader to a group of visiting journalists, was ostentatiously absorbed in a French-English dictionary that he held upside down. Hemingway spent the next 20 years belittling the Deuce. And yes, I marked that because somebody else we know likes to hold books upside down. Second paragraph, page 148. And this is speaking of Haile Selassie. The coronation took place in Ethiopia's new capital of Addis Ababa. Located on a high plateau in the center of the country, in 1930 this was essentially a shanty town consisting largely of mud huts, some of them covered in the garish strips of corrugated iron that had recently become fashionable in Africa. Few buildings had more than one story, and the only ornate structures were St. George's Cathedral and Menelik II's tomb. The town shops were all in the hands of foreigners, mainly Armenians and Levantines. Its one nightclub, the Robinson, was run by a Greek and staffed by Hungarian, Czech, Romanian, and White Russian cabaret girls. There was also a hotel called the Imperial, which fell short of its name except in the lavishness of its fleas and lizards. The air was pungent from open drains, rancid butter, red peppers, and burning cow dung. Every third hut was a mead saloon, which sold fermented honey in front, dusky girls with pomegranate-sized breasts in back. And I think I just picked that paragraph because it kind of paints a pretty good picture there of Addis Ababa, or however the hell you pronounce that. Second paragraph, 156. Oh, and I thought this was really telling, and not much has changed. Italy clearly hoped that American racism would place the United States on its side in this conflict. The New York correspondent for the argued that America, because of its extensive experience with the primitive psychology of the colored races, would appreciate Italy's policies in Ethiopia more than the Western European countries did. But just in case Americans should fail to grasp the necessity and nobility of Italy's mission in Ethiopia, the Italian government hired a New York advertising agency to enlighten them. Its campaign stressed the great cultural and humanitarian benefits that Italy had brought to its other African colonies and now proposed to extend to Ethiopia. The Italian coordinator of the campaign was confident of its success, for, as everyone knew, Americans were more susceptible to advertising than any other people. Then we go to England, and there's a thing called the Jarrow March. England was in hard economic times in the 30s, and there was more than one march where people from a depressed town would march to London and present their signatures to the House of Commons. And this was from the town of Jarrow. And they didn't want to be communists, they didn't want to be socialists, they just wanted the right to work, and they were really well behaved. Jarrow was a shipbuilding town. Other than that, this chapter was kind of boring. We go to the Spanish Civil War, and my note here says, so far I've skipped around this. I haven't read a lot about the Spanish Civil War, and this kind of whet my appetite. I'm going to have to do that. George Orwell, he volunteered to fight in the Spanish Civil War. There were a lot of Austrians. Some of the Austrians that fled the country after the Austrian Civil War, they went to Spain. In fact, more Austrians were killed in Spain than were killed in the Austrian Civil War. The chapter focuses on a town, Guernica. That's the best pronunciation I can give. The Condor Legion, the German planes, and there was Italian planes also, bombed the hell out of this town right during the middle of the day, killed a lot of people, supposedly machine gunned people in the streets, killed nuns, killed a flock of sheep. I thought it was really interesting the reactions that people had. If somebody's in favor of something, and I suppose this goes for both sides, this goes for the left and the right. If somebody's in favor of something, they will be willing to repeat a lie. In this case, it was the right. Franco claimed that as the nationalists retreated from this town, that they lit it on fire and they dynamited it and they killed people. They didn't. It was all an airplane attack. And people repeated that lie. And even people in America repeated that lie. Some of the left-wingers in Spain had attacked the church and wanted to get taxes out of the church, which to me is a fantastic idea. Church lovers everywhere didn't care about the Spanish Civil War because of that. They were willing to let the fascists take over Spain as long as they took care of the church. A little bit depressing, some of this book. we moved to Russia, and it was the Stalinist purges, and I found that also boring. I don't like it when I can't pronounce people's names in a book, and the only interesting thing that I thought was funny in there is Trotsky. Trotsky really had a lot of bad things to say about Stalin. He thought Stalin was a fucking country bumpkin, and at one point, uh, Trotsky says he can't even speak German because all the good communists could speak German. And they go into these show trials that they had. Then it's the Munich Conference, and the Munich conference was, regarding the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, and it was a pretty good chapter. I didn't know that Hitler had made fun of Chamberlain the way he did. He made fun of Chamberlain because Chamberlain carried an umbrella. He made fun of Chamberlain because Chamberlain liked to talk about fishing. Uh, Chamberlain is famous for the appeasement. He appeases Hitler at the Munich conference, and Hitler gets what he wants anyway. At one point, Chamberlain, arranges everything, and Hitler sits at the table staring at him, and Hitler did not expect that. Hitler's staring at him like he waits a couple minutes, and he says, "I'm afraid that this will no longer do." Hitler, just wants more and more and more. Hitler called him a Schweinhund, and he said, these Schweinhunds keep offering me compromises. He wanted to use his army. There was another very funny quote in there where Churchill, and this is after the war already starts, Churchill says, it's only fair that the Germans have the Italians for allies. We had them last time. I don't know. I think the Italians' performance in the war and their equipment, Rommel famously says that their equipment made his hair stand on end. It's funny. I got a little bit more reading to do. Page 350 to 351. Just a little, I swear. This is almost over. During the recess, Hitler and Mussolini retired to the Fuhrer's apartment in the Prinzregentenstrasse. Here Hitler unburdened himself regarding Chamberlain in England. Once again, he said, Chamberlain had impressed him as insignificant. How thoroughly unheroic he was with his stupid umbrella and his endless twaddle about fishing. At Godesberg, Chamberlain had praised the delights of fishing to Hitler, bragging that there was hardly a weekend when he did not fish. As for England, its time of playing governess of Europe must end. The age of the fascist revolutionaries had dawned. Mussolini fully agreed. He grunted that England was a country of little old ladies, its low birth rate a sign of sapped virility. And then I got something else here. Page 351, fifth paragraph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I cannot find it. It was a wonderful book. I really liked it. I'm into another book already. And I'm not that crazy about it. It's going to be a quick read. Thanks for watching.